Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. We are in the middle of some pretty historic times right now. And I don't say that in the meaningless sort of way. Oh, it's historic. The longest war for the United States is ending, and in some sense, it has ended in the last few hours. Joe Biden announcing, as well as Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, that the United States has flown its final flight out of Afghanistan, where the United States has been for 20 years. There are now some images that may become iconic or emblematic in some sense as we go forward. The Associated Press reporting that the last troops have exited Afghanistan, ending America's longest war. There is this image, this night vision image of a military service member provided to the Associated Press boarding a C-17 cargo plane at the airport in Kabul yesterday, considered the final American service member to depart Afghanistan. Now, in reality, there's usually always some caveats, like there's probably still a few there that are maybe in a less official capacity or not in uniform, or you never know. You guys understand what I'm saying. But the point here is Joe Biden is officially getting the United States out, expected to address the nation later today. I plan to cover it live on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. And the top line here is that this is a major accomplishment. The Associated Press writing, the U.S. has completed its withdrawal from Afghanistan, ending America's longest war and closing a chapter in military history likely to be remembered for colossal failures, unfulfilled promises, and a frantic final exit that cost the lives of more than 180 Afghans and 13 U.S. service members, some barely older than the war. Now, there are many who want to argue that means that it was wrong to leave, but it's really important to understand that if you go in a harebrained, ill-thought-out way, as George W. Bush did, and you remain for 2 decades as failures continue to mount and you fail to achieve really almost anything other than the temporary suppression of the Taliban, why would we assume getting out is going to go swimmingly? In other words, it doesn't follow logically. If it was a disaster to get in and it was a disaster while we were there, is it a reasonable expectation to think that the exit is going to be ginger snaps and waterfalls? Now, I'm not being coy about the fact that lives were lost in getting out, in the same way that lives were lost while there. It's been some time since American lives were lost while there, but Afghan lives have continued to be lost there, and Afghan lives will likely continue to be lost there after our departure. But the top line is that this is a major accomplishment in that the big arc is George W. Bush got us in. It was a disaster. It was a quagmire. Barack Obama failed to get us out. Donald Trump failed to get us out. And Joe Biden has gotten us out. I'm not pretending that the rest is irrelevant. It's not. It's people's lives. So there are things that could have been done better. And that applies to the entire time we were there and getting in the first place. That's not unique to Joe Biden. But the big picture is, I mean, in 10 years, in 20 years, and 30 years, what is the story of the war in Afghanistan? Obviously, much of the story remains to be told, and it'll depend on what happens during that period of time. But the arc is George W. Bush got us in 2001. We stayed for 20 years. What the hell were we doing? And then Joe Biden got us out. That's the big story. And it is not a story that is being told in that clear terminology in too many places. Now, there are some that will write in and say, David, it's not being told in that clear terminology because it's not that clear and it's far more complicated. I'm with you. I'm not pretending there isn't complexity here, but those are the big points. A little bit more from this Associated Press article. Hours before President Joe Biden's Tuesday deadline for shutting down a final airlift and thus ending the U.S. war, Air Force transport planes carried a remaining contingent of troops from Kabul airport late Monday. Thousands of troops had spent a harrowing 2 weeks protecting the airlift of tens of thousands of Afghans, Americans, and others seeking to escape a country once again ruled by Taliban militants. In announcing the completion of the evacuation and war effort, General Frank McKenzie, head of U.S. Central Command, said the last planes took off from Kabul airport at 3:29 p.m. Washington time, or 1 minute before midnight in Kabul. He said some American citizens, likely numbering in the very low hundreds, were left behind, and he believes they will still be able to leave the country. Secretary of State Antony Blinken put the number of Americans left behind at under 200, likely closer to 100, and said the State Department would keep working to get them out. He praised the military-led evacuation as heroic and said the U.S. diplomatic presence would shift to Doha, Qatar. Jake Sullivan, Biden's NSA, said Tuesday the mission to get Americans out of Afghanistan continues. Biden was set to address the nation on Afghanistan later Tuesday. We will cover that, as I mentioned. Biden said in a written statement Monday, military commanders unanimously favored ending the airlift, not extending it. He said he asked Blinken to coordinate with international partners in holding the Taliban to their promise of safe passage for Americans and others who want to leave in the days ahead. This is a very important thing. This is the right decision. This was an unwinnable intervention. And the fact that, listen, everything we've seen happen in these 2 weeks proves that we shouldn't be there. The Taliban so quickly taking over control. ISIS so quickly getting in and doing a suicide bombing. These are not reasons to stay. These are reasons to leave. And it doesn't mean we don't care about the people there, but the U.S. simply can't be the world's policeman. A situation that depends on our military presence in Afghanistan indefinitely because of George W. Bush's harebrained decision is untenable. And this is correct. I believe history will bear that out with much tragedy in the meantime. There is no denying that whatsoever. And what I want to talk about next is what's happening with Joe Biden's approval rating, partially because of Afghanistan, but mostly not. If, like me, you've been skeptical that Joe Biden's declining approval rating is actually because of the Afghanistan fiasco, which I believe is the right decision, but has had significant tragedy within it, I believe you are completely correct. It is not because of Afghanistan that Joe Biden's approval rating started to decline. And today, I want to talk about why Joe Biden's approval rating is actually declining. Now, before we do that, the first question is, has Joe Biden's approval rating declined? Never assume, right? I mean, so if the story is why has it declined, first let's verify whether it has declined. It has declined. The answer is yes. Joe Biden's approval started around the mid-50s in an average of polls when he took office. It was in the low 50s around mid-June. It is now down to an average of 47. And Joe Biden has switched to a net disapproval, more people disapproving than approving. That is a decline, and it's outside the margin of error. But Afghanistan is playing a role only recently in this. And part of why we know that that's true is we understand how time works. The decline for Joe Biden's approval started in late July. That was reflective, therefore, because it takes a couple of days to put together the polling data and release it. And it's based on what happened before that. Because Joe Biden's approval rating started declining publicly in late July, it means it was based on what was going on in mid-July. The Afghanistan situation didn't take place in mid-July. It took place in mid-August. So because time moves forward and we don't currently have time machines that I'm aware of, something other than Afghanistan started this decline in Joe Biden's approval. So what is it? Why is it that Joe Biden's approval is declining? There are a number of reasons. First, it is typical that presidents come into office with higher approval and then it goes down. That's really common. Why is that? Well, the way a lot of people think is not when asked, do I approve of the way Joe Biden is handling being president? Most people don't say, well, I agree with 8 out of 10 things he's done, so I approve. Many people think if there is anything he's done that I don't like, I disapprove. And so over time, you typically see presidential approval ratings decline. There are instances that are different. When 9/11 happened, George W. Bush's approval shot up. He then squandered it by attacking the wrong country. Okay. But it is typical that presidents see declining approval during their presidency. So that's a systemic reality. Now, in terms of what was happening, Joe Biden's decline in approval coincided with the COVID Delta variant surge. Biden's high approval early in his term was riding on being new, but also on declining case numbers and on rapidly accelerating vaccination. Thanks to anti-vaxxers and the Delta variant, COVID is now exploding. Hospitalizations are at a record. Vaccinations have slowed down, although lately they are picking back up. And Biden's approval decline came right as the case numbers went up in late June and early July. Now, in addition, Joe Biden started to really need a big legislative accomplishment. I've been talking about this with you for a couple of months, and he has not gotten it. This has put more downward pressure on Joe Biden's approval. And then after months of all of this stuff, yes, Afghanistan imploded. And even though it was not only the correct decision to leave, but one that most Americans support, the chaotic fallout pushed Biden's approval down further, accelerated by negative coverage of what was going on in Afghanistan. Now, I also believe that Joe Biden's approval is going to go lower before it recovers, if it does, because the latest polling is mostly from before the ISIS suicide bombing in Kabul about 5 days ago. I imagine that Joe Biden's approval is going to get down to the low 40s before it might start to recover. That's if there's a recovery. We don't know yet. Now, even though Afghanistan is currently hurting Joe Biden in the polling, I don't think that Afghanistan will be a factor in 2022. It's a guess. It's still possible. But I believe that the combination of short voter memory combined with foreign policy simply not impacting elections very much, particularly midterm elections, combined with it being Democrats up for re-election in 22, not Joe Biden himself, I would be surprised if Afghanistan plays a major role in the midterm elections that are now just about, 15, 14 months away. I actually think that it's wackier to blame Delta on Biden, which started the decline in his approval, than Afghanistan. Delta rose globally, and in some places like the U.S., it's really bad. Why is it so bad? Well, because of the anti-vaxxers who are mostly Republican, because of Republican governors whose states are not doing well. Now, I agree that the buck stops with Biden. It does. But the truth is Biden scaled up vaccination. Biden did most things right on the virus, but Republicans called it fascism. And Republican governors tried to block many of the things that Joe Biden was doing. Blame Biden for things that are truly his fault, or at least a result of what he's done. But we know that that's not how politics actually works. So bottom line, I'm expecting a continued decline in approval for Joe Biden before it levels out. But I don't expect Afghanistan to play a major role in the 2022 midterms. If you disagree with me, or you agree, or you're confused, or you don't even know where you are, you can find me on Twitter at dpacman and let me know your thoughts. What if you could read 10 books in just one sitting? That's exactly what one of my favorite apps lets you do. It's called Blinkist, and what they do is take thousands of popular nonfiction books. They condense them down into text or audio that you can consume in 15 minutes. Blinkist makes sure that you're getting all of the important core insights from each book. So it's perfect for exploring a book you otherwise wouldn't have time for. If there's a full book you're thinking about buying, you can use Blinkist to get a sample first. Just think how much you can enrich yourself by being able to soak up an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month. And you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video. My friends, I would love it if you signed up at joinpakman.com and became a David Pakman Show member today. It is our primary source of funding. We want to be primarily funded by the audience, and you can get instant access to the daily bonus show by becoming a member at joinpakman.com. Let's get caught up on a few other things going on. Republican Congressman Jim Jordan from Ohio suddenly remembers another phone call with then President Donald Trump while the Trump riots were going on January 6th. Now, you might remember that last month, Jim Jordan said he had a phone call with Trump on January 6th. He couldn't remember what they talked about. He couldn't remember whether it was before the riots, during the riots, or after the riots. That's really weird. We now have a new declaration from Jim Jordan, who says to Politico, look, I definitely spoke to the president that day. I don't recall. I know it was more than once. I just don't recall the time. So now he is admitting to at least 2 phone calls on the day of the Trump riots. And it's starting to smell, it's starting to stink like a guy who's just trying to get his story straight for possible future testimony. Now, there's another funny detail here as well. Jim Jordan was asked about Matt Gaetz and whether Matt Gaetz was on that phone call. Was it a so-called 3-way phone call? And Jim Jordan says he'd have to think about it. That's a quote, have to think about it, saying that was a hectic, frenetic day. And he had many different conversations. That's also really weird. You don't remember whether it was just you talking to Trump or whether Matt Gaetz was also on the phone. That's a really strange thing. All of this is adding up to Jim Jordan is an obvious liar. I'll remind you of a couple of the clips. He's been asked this a couple of times. These are almost like instant classic type clips. Here is where Brett Baer was asking him about the phone calls. And he just doesn't make any sense. And you can tell Brett Baer is visibly confused by what's going on. Remember this?
He's obviously going to go down a number of different roads about who knew what when, who was talking to coordinators of the protest. Did you talk to the former president that day?
I've talked to the former president umpteen times, thousands. I mean, not thousands
on
times,
January
but countless times. I talked to the president. I never talk about what we talk about.
So here is Jim Jordan first just trying to avoid even saying at all whether this is from July. First, he was like, I just talked to the president. He didn't even want to answer about January 6th, but Brett Baer pressed him.
I just don't think that's appropriate, just like I don't talk about what happens in Republican conferences. So
Sure.
I've talked to the president numerous times. I continue to talk to the president
No,
since
I
he's
mean
left
on
office.
January 6th, Congressman.
Yes, I mean, I've talked to the president. I've talked to the president so many, I can't remember all the days I've talked to him, but I've certainly talked to the president.
Yeah.
Okay, so notice that's 2 attempts, and he still doesn't say on January 6th I spoke to him.
And on that day was... Can you share any of the insight of what he was thinking about that day?
Brett, the people we need to come testify are the people who can testify to the fundamental questions. Why didn't the United States Capitol, the People's House, have an appropriate security posture on that day? And what have we done? Those are the people we need to hear from. That's the information and testimony we need to get. That's what we should focus on. But I don't think that Benny Thompson, the chairman of this committee, said everything's on the table.
So he's off on Benny Thompson. So that started to get weird. And then taking a cue from this, when Jim Jordan appeared on Spectrum News, good for him, the reporter tried to press him on the same stuff, and it was the same type of evasive nonsense.
There's some confusion over what you told Brett Baer on Fox News on Tuesday night, so I want to clear it up. First off, yes or no, did you speak with President Trump on January 6th?
Yeah, I mean, I spoke with the president last week. I speak with the president all the time. I spoke with him on January 6th.
So here, now we have an admission, okay? In the time between the Brett Baer interview and this one, now Jim Jordan admits, yes, he probably realizes I'm not going to be able to avoid answering this. I will concede that we spoke on that day.
I talk with President Trump all the time, and that's I don't think that's unusual. I would expect members of Congress to talk with the president of the United States when they're trying to get done the things they told the voters in their district to do. I'm actually kind of amazed sometimes that people keep asking this. But of course, I talk to the president all the time. I talked with him, like I said, I talked with him last week.
On January 6th, did you speak with him before, during, or after the Capitol was attacked?
I'd have to go. I spoke with him that day after. I think after. I don't know if I spoke with him in the morning or not. I just don't know.
So this is when we started, you know, there's a couple of possibilities at this point, right? It's like, well, maybe he's alluding to I spoke to him more than once. It was after and before. But the idea that if it was only one phone call, this was like this was a blockbuster event, riots incited by Trump, carried out by Trumpists. You would remember, was the phone call before any of that, meaning we didn't talk about the riots because the riots hadn't happened. If the phone call was during or after, Clearly, the phone call would mostly be about the riots. It's just not plausible. But this is when we started to think maybe there were 2 phone calls or even more.
I'd have to go back and I mean, I don't know that when those conversations happened, but what I know is I spoke with them all the time. But Taylor, the key here is the people we need to speak to.
Okay, so then he gets back to, we're not even talking to the right people. You shouldn't be talking to me. It shouldn't be about me and Trump. So the word conversations there raised, well, maybe there were multiple calls. And then now Jim Jordan is admitting that there was more than one call. So not exactly a guy who transmits honesty. And if you're wondering, why would he want to hide the facts of when he spoke to Trump? Because if he spoke to Trump during or after the riots, he would have relevant knowledge about Trump's state of mind. The reports are Trump was gleeful about the riots. Publicly, Trump had to pretend that the riots were bad, at least to some degree, even though he still said, I understand, you're great people and I understand why you're upset because the election was stolen. That's why Jim Jordan would not want to concede that he spoke to Trump while the riots were going on or shortly thereafter. So really something else, clearly a dishonest guy, and we'll see what ultimately comes of this. I have for you today this is probably my favorite video from the last 3 months, other than my own interview with Mike Lindell, the CEO of MyPillow. This is a fantastic interview from Australia, where Sarah Ferguson interviews Sidney Powell. Now, Sidney Powell was one of the lawyers going around the country trying to legislate Trump's voter fraud claims. At different points in time, Sidney Powell was at one point in the Oval Office meeting with Trump, at another point denounced, or not denounced, but disassociated from Trump, claiming this is not someone working for me. This is someone doing her own thing. This interview is like nothing I have ever seen. At one point, Sidney Powell just cuts the interview. Let's take a look at some of the highlights. Listen to this. And what's the point here? The point, I know some people say, David, don't tell us what the point is. Let us watch it. Look at how when we go full circle, these people who were adamant about their claims when they were carrying out these legal challenges, now you can tell they never knew what the hell they were talking about. Let's take a listen. Look at this.
Let's get a few simple facts straight.
Yes.
In how many states were Smartmatic machines and software used in the 2020 election?
I don't even know the exact numbers.
But you were making some big statements, very dramatic, critical statements about Smartmatic. You must have known what their involvement was in the election.
No. Oh, you'd have to go look at our complaint with respect to the 4 states that we filed legal complaints in to get the details of that.
A Google search would have shown you that Smartmatic was operating in one single county in California.
Well, I'm saying I think their involvement's probably a lot bigger than that.
Okay, so now you start to see Sidney Powell doesn't even really know the involvement of Smartmatic, which was like the centerpiece of her claims. And without evidence, even after being told the facts about Smartmatic, she just says, I just believe they were more involved. Oh, okay. And is that the type of argument you would expect to make in court, Sidney?
Research or fact-checking did you do at the time to find out what Smartmatic's actual involvement in the election was?
Do you work for Smartmatic?
You've made an allegation against Smartmatic that they stole...
No, I'm a journalist. I'm wondering whether you have any basis for the claims you make.
Presidential election. I think it's incumbent on both of us to know what Smartmatic's involvement was. It seems like a pretty foundational fact.
I mean, I'm confused right now about why you're here.
Because you made...
How did you get into my house, ma'am? Who let you in?
A series of very strong allegations against Smartmatic and against Dominion, containing many errors of fact. Do you accept the fact now that the company that you accused of stealing a national election only operated in one county, in LA, in California?
No.
One county, one state?
No, I'm not prepared to accept that fact. I think Smartmatic's involvement was far more significant than that. Do I think they're trying to minimize their involvement? Of course I do.
You said that Smartmatic owns Dominion. How do you justify such a basic factual error?
I'm going to stop this interview.
Right.
It's wholly inappropriate in the litigation that we're in.
But we're not even in the area of great dispute. These are the simple facts of who owns what.
No, we're done.
All right. So she gets up and
These
then...
are facts.
When we are in litigation against me personally...
I understand that, but we're
billions.
Yes,
of dollars.
I understand that these are very serious allegations.
Thank you very much.
But these are also...
So, as you can tell, absolutely no factual basis for anything. She does eventually come back, although it seems almost like under protest. Let's take a look at a little more.
After some discussion, Ms. Powell agreed to answer more questions.
Yeah.
I'm highly skeptical of how long this is going to last.
Claiming her legal issues prevented her from talking about the voting machine companies. All of the organizations who had the responsibility to check the nature of this election and to verify its results say there was no fraud.
That's the propaganda they're putting out. I disagree with that completely, and we have and will produce additional evidence that shows otherwise.
How many years will it take to produce the evidence they claim is coming? I'm not asking it sarcastically. I would love to know from them. Do you think we will get this in 22, 2023, when will we get that evidence? Trump says very soon, very, very soon.
What you're describing is a massive countrywide fraud involving the FBI, the DOJ, the Department of Homeland Security, the organizations who certify elections, and on, all the way up to the Attorney General, and thousands of local election officials. Are you saying that thousands of Americans participated in a fraud?
I am saying that thousands of Americans had some role in it, knowingly or unknowingly. It was essentially a bloodless coup where they took over the presidency of the United States without a single shot being fired.
Who's they in that sentence?
I don't know who all that they are.
They did it. I don't know who they are. They didn't even know they were doing it, but they did it.
I would really like to know the answer to that, but it's a significant number of they, and they knew exactly what they were doing, and they planned it for at least 3 years. This was no accident.
Do you ever hear yourself and think that it sounds ridiculous?
No, I know myself very well. I've been in me a long time.
She has been inside of herself long enough to know she sounds totally normal, my friends. So, you know, is Sidney Powell delusional? Is there a mental illness component here? Is she just wrong? Is there a financial incentive? I don't think there is a financial incentive. I asked that, but I'm pretty sure the answer there is no. What on earth is going on with this woman? And that is just a stunning, stunning video. We'll have more of those clips on the show's Instagram. You can find us on Instagram at David Pakman Show. And while you're there, follow me at david.pakman. Don't forget that the best way to support the David Pakman Show is by becoming a member, which gives you access to the daily bonus show, the regular show with no commercials. You also get access to our entire archive of every episode dating back a really long time and plenty of other awesome membership perks. Go to joinpakman.com and use the coupon code BETTER21 for a huge discount. Joinpakman.com. It's great to have back on the program today Bobby Azarian, who is a cognitive neuroscientist, blogger for Psychology Today, and also writer of the Substack Road to Omega. Bobby, it's great to have you back on today.
Thanks for having me, David. Appreciate it.
So maybe to start with, you know, many of us have been seeing, we can go back and talk about during the pandemic. We can talk about January 6th in many different ways and from different people. We've been seeing behavior that seems dysregulated at minimum, and other words that we could apply to it at worst if we want to. Can you talk first from a neuroscience standpoint? What is it that is happening when the way I would as a layman say it, their common sense seems to be almost hijacked in a sense, and they behave in ways that many of us find hard to imagine ever behaving ourselves? What is it that's taking place?
So I guess the first thing I'd say is that if we don't look at what's going on through the lens of science, in particular psychology, and more specifically a theory called terror management theory, we're going to be completely lost about what's going on. Things will just seem completely random and chaotic and unpredictable.
Yeah.
And in a sense, they are certainly chaotic, but they're not totally unpredictable. So if we're looking at things from the perspective of psychology, and we look at all of the events that have transpired since really the emergence of Trump, really you can go back farther than that, then we see that a lot of these responses were due to events that caused existential fear in people. So, for example, Trump, the emergence of Trump himself was a response to fears over ISIS and fears over immigration. When Trump took power, then for people on the left, their fear was having an incompetent leader that stokes division. Then the pandemic hit, and there's like it's the biggest form of existential fear. We're all freaked out.
Sure.
So when you have those conditions, basically that fear creates certain psychological effects that promote tribalism, that make us more aggressive towards people who don't share our worldview. And once that process happens, it's very hard to reverse that, because there are certain psychological phenomena, like something I can talk about in a minute called amygdala hijack, where basically we're controlled by our fears. We're sort of programmed rather than being these rational thinkers. And once this happens, one side becoming more extreme polarizes the other side that's trying to balance that. And then you get on this trajectory where you're going towards just more divisive state. And so if you don't do something to get a hold of that, basically we're headed towards disaster.
So let's think a little bit, like, for example, when I hear you say that a lot of this can be triggered when we're around people that don't share our worldview, and it creates this loop and cycle. With something like the anti-vaccine, anti-mask protests, I'm not seeing the pro-vaccine and pro-mask people behave the same way as the anti, although in some general sense, maybe it would happen because both are being challenged in terms of their worldview. The anti-mask people are being challenged by the pro and the pro by the anti, but we're seeing the erratic behavior almost exclusively from the anti-vaccine and anti-mask people. So what's causing that difference, that split?
Yeah, so I guess I would say that, okay, when you're talking about a very specific topic relating to the mask, then you do see that behavior on the right that doesn't make sense to us as progressives, but it can do things that so the left will be more like gung-ho about wearing masks and like taking precautions. So it's not that extreme behavior is always bad. Extremism is bad when the ideas are extremely stupid. So you can have radical good ideas that can transform society. And when you have a situation where there's this looming existential threat like the pandemic, it can catalyze civil rights movements, or it can catalyze civil wars. And really, when the threat is so extreme, it kind of does both those things at the same time. So going back to what you said, I would argue that it's not fully on the right, and in the left, it manifests itself in different ways.
So,
for example, you have the Black Lives Matter movement, and that really exploded after the George Floyd murder, and that was in May, just right at the beginning of the pandemic, when in the U.S. we started seeing these like warnings to like wear a mask, not go outside, and stuff like that, and that explosion, that protest, like nationwide protest, occurred because everyone was so fearful because of the pandemic. And then you had this like counter movement. You had people like saying Blue Lives Matter in response to Black Lives Matter. And, that was problematic. Didn't even make sense, because the whole point of Black Lives Matter was saying Black lives should matter as much as everyone else's lives. So it was really all lives matter from the beginning. It's very ironic that like the other side started saying all lives matter when like that was what the first movement was about. Anyway, you get this defund the police movement in response to like this right-wing Blue Lives Matter, All Lives Matter thing. And like that slogan like is very extreme. And now I see political campaign ads using that slogan to scare people away from Democrats. So I would say that the left matches the right. They just do it in completely different ways.
Right. And that's interesting. You bring up the defund now being used against some on the left. From the beginning, I said, I don't think this is a productive slogan. And here's why. And it's very interesting that you point to that. I do want to you mentioned the amygdala hijack. Can you talk about what that is so we're all on the same page with it?
Yeah. So basically, when we go through life, we're kind of mostly on autopilot. And some studies have shown that, the famous Libet studies on free will. Basically, we're programmed and we have a certain set of beliefs and goals, and we kind of behave according to those. But a lot of times our programmed behavior won't be optimal. So if we're fearful, we might get aggressive. When that happens, there's another part of the brain that is responsible for kicking in and producing rational behavior, where we analyze the situation and then we make decisions where we're like more in control than being controlled by our instincts and reflexes. So the two brain areas that are important are the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala is involved in processing threat and is associated with the fear response. So when we do perceive a threat, basically it triggers the amygdala, and then that puts us in sort of like a fight or flight mode. And then the prefrontal cortex, which is a newer part of the brain evolutionarily, and that part is supposed to calm the amygdala. And the problem is in times where fear is super high, the prefrontal cortex can't do its job because the amygdala is just constantly being triggered. There's also some interesting studies that show correlations between impaired prefrontal cortex function, which is responsible for this, we call it cognitive control or executive control,
right,
regulating your emotions. And so we see impaired executive control with people who are religious fundamentalists, or we see it with people who score high on surveys of racism. We see it in people with drug addiction. So basically, those people are less in control. You could say they have less free will because they're unable to override this programming and this effect that you have when basically the amygdala hijacks the cognitive system. So what we can do about that is become aware of that. And simply becoming aware, having what's called meta-awareness, can give you control over that. And then there are exercises you can do, like practicing mindfulness, to kind of strengthen the prefrontal cortex, because it really is like a muscle.
Thinking of that, I ask this not to excuse morally, ethically, or legally the actions of the January 6th rioters, but I ask it in order to try to understand, is it a type of situation where you're in this mass of people and someone decides to start busting down doors or breaking windows and going in? Is it possible that you sort of experience an amygdala hijack there and you just kind of are riding high and carried in and participating, not because you went intending to do that, but because the situation around you sort of puts you into that state? Is that a situation where this happens?
Definitely. And I would like to say that it's really important to understand these people, because if we don't understand the mindset, we'll be completely lost.
Yeah.
In terms of how to get through to them. So when you talk about empathy for these people, it's not so much about like wanting to be a better human being to have empathy for them. It's really more about being practical, finding a solution to the problem. So these people, just like you said, during like the Capitol attack, they're tuned into social media. They're plugged into the people who are stoking that fear constantly. They're responding to the others around them and things that are happening in real time. And so you kind of get this collective effect where it's like the amygdala hijack is kind of like spreading from person to person. And once that happens, if there's not someone that comes out and says, hey, everybody, like this is kind of crazy,
right?
It's just going to snowball.
Is mob mentality kind of a layman's term for group amygdala hijack?
Yes, definitely. It's related to that. It's also related to tribalism. I didn't go into terror management theory. I know we talked about it last time. I could talk about that a little bit in relation to like this mob mentality, if you want.
Yeah, I would be interested in hearing that, because I mean, what we're, many of us are starting to say, is this going to happen again? How likely are these folks who in some online spaces are saying, if we don't get X, it's going to be time for January 6th part 2 or whatever. I think it would be important to understand what it is that could get them there, but also what could prevent it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think to prevent it, I think to get an understanding of what's actually going on, we have to understand terror management theory. So terror management theory starts with the fear of death. So at some point in the evolutionary development of man, or human, I should say, we became intelligent enough to be aware of our own mortality.
Right.
That someday we're going to inevitably die and be gone and possibly forgotten. And that realization can be paralyzing if you don't have a psychological mechanism for coping with that. So when that happened, that necessitated the invention of cultural worldviews like religions, political ideologies, national identities. Cultural worldviews basically act as death anxiety buffers by giving us a sense of purpose and meaning in life. Actually, they are said to offer paths to immortality. So a religion, excuse me, David. Religion offers a path to literal immortality through the concept of an afterlife, and national identities offer a path to what's called symbolic immortality through feeling like you're part of this bigger movement, this bigger idea that will outlive the individual. So what terror management theory says is that if cultural worldviews are how we deal with existential fear, then in times when there's some existential threat looming or we're reminded of our death for some other reason, we are going to cling to our cultural worldviews more. We're going to become more tribal, and we're going to become more aggressive towards people who have different worldviews. So really it explains tribalism. It's interesting because worldviews, basically, you needed some sort of worldview to emerge to have human civilization, because it's what binds people together under a common idea. But at the same time, if you have people at different parts of the world, different cultural worldviews are going to emerge. So the thing that unites people within the group is the very same thing that can that divides people into tribes. So one of the ways to deal with this is to look at your different worldviews, look at what you have in common. Like, for example, look at the things that the right are complaining about and they're fearful about that are valid. Now, there are going to be a lot of things that aren't valid, a lot of crazy things that just have nothing to do with reality, but there are going to be some things that are legitimate concerns, things that they care about. And we try to align interest at that point. And if we can do that, we can start to create some sort of unifying worldview. And we really need to do that consciously. It doesn't happen by accident. So there will be a second Capitol attack, something not necessarily at the Capitol, but something that's like that.
Right.
We're headed there. And if we don't do something very consciously to change that trajectory, I would predict that it will happen for sure.
So would I. So would I. We've been speaking with Bobby Azarian, who's a cognitive neuroscientist, blogger for Psychology Today, and also writes the Substack Road to Omega. Bobby, it's always great having you on. I appreciate it.
Great, David. Can I mention the Road to Omega project? So
yes.
That's really what me and some colleagues and friends and allies have started to design, which just sets out a solution for all of this. So everything we talked about, problem of tribalism, understanding that, a Bayesian reasoning system, a logical reasoning system to fight misinformation and conspiracy theories. And that plan is up at roadtoomega.substack.com.
If you value what we do at The David Pakman Show, remember to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can get access to behind the scenes videos, the daily bonus show, the commercial-free daily show, as well as special discounts on merch, including hats, hoodies, mugs, and t-shirts. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Okay, let's start with a story I was hoping to get to yesterday. Didn't have time. It's sort of like rounding out the anti-vax police officer that died of COVID, who was on ivermectin, another anti-vax right-wing radio host who died of COVID. This is the anti-mask militia dude who has died of COVID. His name was Caleb Wallace. Caleb Wallace, anti-mask organizer and co-founder of the San Angelo Freedom Defenders, has died of COVID-19. This is a really sad story. Caleb Wallace, co-founder of San Angelo Freedom Defenders and West Texas Minutemen State Coordinator, has died from causes related to COVID-19, according to an update on GoFundMe by his wife, Jessica Wallace. Caleb has peacefully passed on. He will forever live in our hearts and minds, reads the most recent update. This is from the stay-at-home mom of 3, expecting a 4th child late next month. While Wallace had become a semi-regular feature in local news through his conservative activism, it was his battle with COVID that garnered the national spotlight after his family's struggle was featured in an article published in the San Angelo Standard-Times on August 22nd. His organization of the Freedom Rally, a protest against state and local mask requirements during the summer of 2020, made him a figure of some prominence among those in the community who were opposed to mask mandates. The New York Times reports San Angelo Mayor Brenda Gunter commented in an interview, "They believe the coronavirus was a hoax, and they believe the government was being too heavy-handed when it came to masks." Yahoo News reports on this as well. Texas anti-mask Freedom Rally organizer fighting for his life with COVID-19. This was just a Friday before he died. At that time, his wife, Jessica Wallace, wrote that she had a heartbreaking update. Quote, "He's not doing good. It's not looking in our favor. His lungs are stiff due to the fibrosis. They called and said they've run out of options for him and asked if I would consent to a do not resuscitate. And it would be up to us when to stop treatments. My heart just can't. I can't imagine my life without him." At the time, the 30-year-old Wallace had been unconscious, ventilated, and heavily sedated. In July of 2020, he reportedly organized a freedom rally to be against government control of our lives. They hosted a separate rally under the San Angelo Freedom Defenders last year to, quote, "end COVID tyranny." He, listen, it's what else is there to say? You know, here is video of Caleb Wallace saying COVID guidelines make no sense and COVID's just fine to live with. Just live with it.
The basic rights of breathing free air, moving about freely, going into businesses without being harassed about a mask or about, these doctors levying these ridiculous restrictions upon its citizens with no representation in city council, commissioners' courts. Judge Steve Floyd nowhere to be found on this. So we are a group of people. We're not just a bunch of angry people. We're people that, yes, we are fed up, but we also want to provide options and provide a positive option. And with this rally, this is important to us as a group because we have to start making changes now, reverse the trend back to normalcy, back before March 2020. And what we're seeing now is people were scared. We were kind of unsure what this was all about. We were being fed stuff from the top saying, hey, this is super dangerous. And, you know, we were all kind of unsure. I mean, rightly so. But the science is out there and it's saying otherwise, that this is perfectly fine to live with. It's deadly to certain people, but we never in the history of this country we've locked down healthy people with the sick.
And as I mentioned, his wife is due with their fourth child on September 27th. A pregnant wife and 3 young kids. Now, of course, you can be vaccinated and die. That can happen. It is very unlikely that a 30-year-old vaccinated individual would have died if he had gotten the free vaccine that is now widely available at basically any pharmacy. If this story doesn't convince people, I don't think anything will. And just think back to some of those Trump rallies. I remember it's like burned into my mind. There was a Trump rally and we were covering it before it started. And there was like a sort of scan of the crowd. And there was a woman, maybe, 60-ish, with a shirt on. And the back of the shirt had on it, "My son died of COVID and I'm still here at the rally." This was before vaccines were even available. This was like last summer. I think that there are millions and millions of people who are just beyond reach. That's it. There's no way around it. And this is a tragic story, at least as far as these kids are concerned. You can say whatever you want about, listen, Caleb Wallace chose not to get vaccinated. The kids didn't choose to have an idiot dad who was going to refuse to get vaccinated, a vaccine that's free and likely would have prevented him from dying. Not 100%, but likely would have prevented him from dying. The kids didn't choose that. And now they grow up without a father. And this fourth baby about to be born in late September is born and will have no dad because of this guy's mistaken beliefs. Think whatever you want about him. And we can talk about, should we feel bad for the individuals who choose not to get the vaccine or not? And are they victims of misinformation, or are they bad people, or are they both, or we don't know. But the kids aren't guilty of anything. And it is just, if this doesn't convince people, I truly don't know what will. Let's go from something horrifying to something really great. We need some good news, my friends. Ladies and gentlemen, we got him. After much toil and struggle. Just kidding. I sit in front of a camera in an air-conditioned room. But after many years and many videos, that's more accurate, the David Pakman Show YouTube channel has reached 1 billion views. That's billion with a B. Yes, a B. Now, I do have a little secret to tell you. This is kind of anticlimactic, but I might as well mention it because it's interesting. On YouTube, the public number of views is based on videos that are still published and public, okay? Because we've had a few big videos get taken down over time because of copyright claims, because we use unlisted videos for our member-only videos, we actually hit 1 billion views internally several weeks ago. But in terms of the publicly viewable videos that are still online today, it happened late last night or early this morning. Last night I tweeted, guys, we're like 140,000 views away. And by this morning, we had gotten there. 1 billion YouTube views. This is a really big accomplishment. It puts us in the top tiny slice of all YouTube channels. Some people are saying that first billion is the toughest, but we are now billionaires on YouTube. One other note, the YouTube channel has just been killing lately. I know many people write to me, they say, David, your show is circling the drain. They've been saying that for a decade. It's actually bigger than ever. Another really exciting milestone. We got our first single video with 10 million views recently. Our top videos right now Again, with 10 million views from 2011, man stands on 7-hour flight because of obese passenger. Second most viewed video from 2013, 6.5 million views, called "This is what happens when you wear a Nazi uniform in court." That was a hell of a story. From 2013, 6.3 million views. Girl makes racist comment to footballer. He calls her out. From 2011, 5.5 million views. Anonymous hacks Westboro Baptist Church. A real tentpole moment in David Pakman Show history. Then from 2012, just a hair under 5 million views. Soldier attacking protester at funeral. From 2020, 4.7 million views. Trump humiliated in worst interview in history. That's that epic viral Jonathan Swan Axios video. And then from 2017, 4.7 million views. Racist woman harasses Muslim shopper in Trader Joe's. I remember there's something avocado related in that video. I think it's that the racist woman in the video has a shopping cart and is in line to pay, but only has a bag of avocados. That is really unusual grocery store behavior. If I'm buying one item, I don't get a cart, especially if it's a relatively light item like a bag of avocados. Okay, now interestingly, due to the nature of the content, 3 of our top 7 videos of all time are completely demonetized. Not complaining, just telling you how crazy the situation is. All right, so thank you for 1 billion views. Subscribe. Let's get to 1.5 million subscribers and on to the next 1 billion views. And remember that you can also subscribe to our second channel with unique live stream and behind the scenes content at youtube.com/PakmanLive. So it's the 2 channels, youtube.com/The David Pakman Show, 1 billion views, almost 1.4 million subscribers. And then separately, youtube.com/PakmanLive. Exciting new things going on there. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2DavidP. We will be accepting congratulations for 1 billion views through the weekend. I don't even know what I'm talking about. We accept congratulations anytime. Here's an interesting voicemail with just a really specific logistical question. How much are people spending for pillows? Because those MyPillow ones are pretty damn expensive.
Yeah, have you ever noticed how expensive the MyPillow pillows are?
Right.
You can get a pillow like that for $5 at Walmart. That's probably better.
Yeah. Oh, I guess that's it. Okay. I have no idea how much a MyPillow costs. I know people who spend a lot of money on pillows, $150, $200, and the pillows are tailored for this, that, or the other thing. I'm just an old-fashioned goose feather pillow guy. I like a firm goose feather pillow. There's like a 2-pack that I buy off of the internet for like $50. 2-pack for $50. Beautiful, perfect pillow for me. The people saw it. They said, "Sir, this is an absolutely perfect pillow for both reading and for sleeping." And that's what I need. I have no idea how much the MyPillows cost, but it seems to be making Mike Lindell a lot of money. We have a great bonus show planned for you today. China is announcing a limit on children's online gaming to just 3 hours a week. Is this good? Is it an authoritarian dystopian fiasco? Which is it? Is it both? We will talk about that. Secondly, you might, if you drive in the United States, be used to only unleaded gasoline. Of course, I mean, it always says unleaded. But Algeria was still using leaded gasoline, but no more. The world has now rid itself of leaded gasoline. Why did it take so long, and what's the history of that? And lastly, after getting hit with a Category 4 hurricane, New Orleans is facing weeks of power outages. I have been to New Orleans in the summer. It is not a place you want to be without power in the summer, and therefore without air conditioning. We will talk about what's going on there on today's bonus show. Get instant access. I invite you to sign up at joinpakman.com. You can use the coupon code BETTER21 if you would like. And if you would prefer to join via Patreon instead of on our website, you can go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show and get access to the very same bonus show. I will see you then. We are here all week, otherwise tomorrow. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman.